Alrighty. Welcome everybody to our October rights offering webinar. I'm Christy and I'm the Executive Director for SSA. We're super happy that you are here to join us today. Today we're going to hear from Michael and Jason at Broadridge and Scott from Computershare. We do have the question and answer feature going and the chat as well. So if you want to throw any questions in either of those spots, we'll start answering them as they come in during the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to our panel to start.
Thank you very much. I will be kicking things off. Please ignore my horrible voice right now, getting over a little something like everybody else. But thank you on our behalf to Christy and the SSA for allowing us to present during this webinar. I'll be talking about rights offerings, what they're used for, benefits of them, and really most importantly, the agent's aspect and our thoughts around them, what we see, kind of what we run into, and maybe some of the more difficult areas on our side of the shop. I don't see the presentation being shared.
You're not seeing it right now?
I am not. Is anybody else?
I see it. It is up now.
It is. Okay. All right, now I got it. Okay, so what is a rights offering? Well, to put it very simply, it is a way for companies to raise capital through the issuance of shares and sometimes additional securities such as a warrant. One quick thing to hit early, a rights offer is also known as a subscription offer. They're one and the same. A rights plan is something completely different. A rights plan is basically a tool that prevents hostile takeovers by triggering the issuance of usually preferred shares if somebody or a group accumulates a large enough position. That's not what we're talking about here. This is all about capital raises. So what documents are normally sent out in a rights offer? The big one is, of course, the prospectus. That's going to be a large book. It's going to spell out the reasons for the rights offer, meaning what's the company going to use the assets for, the risks behind it, just because they're raising capital and they have these goals in mind, by no means is it going to result in success. What the limits are. Whenever you issue out additional shares, you're going to dilute your existing share population. So, the share price may decline slightly after a rights offer occurs. And of course, the dollar amount that's being raised. Along with that, the prospectus spells out all of the rules. You can subscribe for basic rights. You can oversubscribe to get extra rights. We'll talk more about that as we dig a little bit further deeper into the presentation here. So what you see right here is really just the top of the first page of the prospectus. They all really start the same, which is going to lead into the precedents, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Go to the next slide. All right, so along with the prospectus, a rights card is mailed out. You're going to see a lot of the same out there. Usually it's either the Computershare card here, there's a Broadridge version, and then there's another version out there that a lot of the lawyers have prepared on behalf of issuers and their agents, really off the bat. Precedent is really one of the key words in the law world, and we see in many instances that the initial drafts of the documents that are presented to us look very similar to recent transactions, normally within the same sector of a company's business. I know, BioPharm is big on capital raises. Pulse Biosciences is the example we used. Also BioPharm. So that's really sort of the hot target for rights office right now. The reason I bring up precedent. So as the agent, to back up, I happen to be a panelist on the SIFMA conference a couple years back. And the first two groups that went, there were comments from the crowd in which, we don't understand why the agent allows for outdated rules. For instance, one of the documents that can be mailed out with the rights card and the prospectus is a notice of guaranteed delivery. What that notice does is it essentially buys more time to the subscriber. You can essentially, send in the notice and say, hey, look, I'm going to come in for a set number of rights and set over subscription. And normally that gap between when the notice is delivered and the notice deadline, which is now 1 day after expiration, that window of time is usually used to accumulate the funds and deliver them to the agent, usually through DTC because it's a beneficial holder. What we see sometimes on initial drafts is guaranteed delivery dates of expiration plus 2 days and expiration plus 3 days. Now, in a trade plus 3 settlement cycle and the more recent trade plus 2 settlement cycle, that used to work. We're now in a trade plus 1 cycle, and the DTC, through their many functions, requires a single day notice window. So in the instance that we as agent pick up on those inconsistencies in the docs, we'll of course provide guidance. The reason I brought up the SIFMA conference is the agents sort of got the blame. Meanwhile, in many scenarios, we're not brought into the picture until the draft documents are already in existence. Either a prelim filing has taken place without an agent being named, or near prelim file docs are shared with us, and it doesn't give us much time to sort of step in and provide our expertise on what we normally see and what's going to be accepted by the street. I'd say this because you don't be shy about talking to your agent or a potential agent. We have many instances where we're asked to sign, non-disclosure agreements, which we'll do gladly. Everything stays confidential until launch and it's public. We just want to make sure that we're involved early enough across the board for accuracy on all docs. So you've got the prospectus, you've got the rights card. The rights card is actually what's used by the subscriber on the registered side to identify the number of rights they're subscribing for. In the section on the right there, which is a little small to see, but you'll get the idea. You write in the number of rights you're subscribing for on the basic side. On the oversubscription, you put the per right, typically dollar amount, and you indicate the amount that you're funding. And then you'll, of course, follow the instructions on remitting that card and the funds to the agent. Funding is done through many different ways. The least popular of which is personal checks. Reason being, there's a 3 to 5 day clearance period after an offer. The worst case scenario we get is a subscription comes in last day. It's accompanied by a personal check. We don't know if that check's going to clear for 3 to 5 days. We can't run final numbers until it does. So we've seen more and more often that personal checks are removed as an option on the funding side. Obviously, wires being the primary one. Some other documents that can go out with these are a letter to the stockholders, a letter to the clients, and a letter to the brokers. In some instances, you're going to have custodial accounts in the registered books. There's a letter written sort of for that population. And then the really nice issuers will also include a form of instructions. It's a little booklet, essentially, that brings you through all the documents, what you should fill out, where you should send it, and just gives a nice sort of all-encompassing step-by-step approach to filling everything out. Now, keep in mind, this is a registered mailing I'm speaking to specifically. Beneficial mailings are a little bit different. We'll talk more about those in a few minutes. All right, so any questions on, in general, what a rights offering is and what is mailed?
We don't have any questions so far.
Excellent. All right, I would throw it over to Scott for slide 4.
Thanks so much, Jason. So Jason ended up mentioning getting us involved right away, and that's critical. So you want to hire a subscription agent and an information agent. So the 2 key roles: subscription agent takes in all the rights exercises, processes them for you, collects all the funds for you, provides nightly reports, and runs the offer. The information agent will first off help with your street mailing. So they'll get the materials necessary for the street and get those distributed out to the street shareholders. And then they'll also take the phone calls. The other role that they may play, if you want, is to really assess the street and what's coming in and what's expected to come in. They may make some phone calls to their key contacts at the various brokers and just talk to them to see if they're expecting those numbers to go up and if different shareholders are participating. So they do hold a key role also. Computershare, we use Georgeson as our sister company, and I know Broadridge has that pretty much internal, their information and subscription agent. So that's step number 1. And by the way, I see the screen up there. I'm not one for reading word for word off of the doc, but we'll go So that's in regards to your announcement. Company announces the rights offering, but you do want to hire that agent. The second thing is in regards to rights allocation. You have to figure out how many rights you're going to issue. And before you can do that, you want to find out how many shares you're looking to offer. I see some companies offer 5% of their issue outstanding, 10% of their issue outstanding. That has to be determined before you can determine how you're going to issue your rights. So your rights are going to be based on the amount of shares that you're looking to issue in this offer. Just for instance, if you were issuing 10%, so if you had 100,000 shares outstanding, to make numbers simple, and you were issuing 10% of that number, you could do one of two things. You could issue the rights on a one-for-one basis. So if a shareholder had one share, they would end up getting one right. But because you're only issuing 10% of your new shares issued, it would take 10 rights to subscribe for one new share. So that would be one scenario. You're looking for 10% issuance. You're issuing one right for every share that the shareholder owns as of record date. So you would have to set a record date. And then it would take that shareholder 10 rights in order to get one share. And then Jason mentioned oversubscriptions. That when you issue out your rights, not all of them are going to get exercised. I have yet to see a rights offering that was fully subscribed. So what the oversubscription allows is for you to issue that full 10% number, whatever that number ends up being, because not all of your shareholders are going to participate. So they will be able to oversubscribe. The shareholders who do participate, if they exercise all of their rights, they'll be able to oversubscribe for a set amount of shares. And that is subject to proration at the end of the offer. The other way of issuing out your rights, you could issue them out so every share on record date gets 5 rights or 0.5 rights, whatever that may be. And then when they exercise, instead of it being 10 rights will get you one new share, every right will actually allow you to get a share. So it's usually in the scenario that I just talked about, the 10 rights getting one new share. If you want to issue a 1-for-1, so one right for every share owned, you would do a 0.1 exercise. So every right exercise would allow you to get 0.1 of a new share. Now, why that's important is because of the payment of those exercise rights, first off, and then secondly, rounding comes into play. So if a shareholder, let's say it takes 10 rights in order to get one new share, if a shareholder only holds 5 shares on record date, they're only going to have 5 rights issued to them. They're not going to be able to participate in the offer unless you will allow a roundup. So that holder will at least be able to exercise for one new share, or you can round up their rights position also. So they would at least get 10 rights in the offer to exercise for that one share. That would be a roundup. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is the ratios. Let's say the offer is every 3 rights will get you one new share. Some of our clients will end up rounding up to be divisible by that 3 number. So if you have 4 record date shares, you would have 6 rights issued to you. If you had 7 record date shares, you would have 9 rights issued to you. So your rights would always be divisible by 3. So that's what to think about as far as the rights. How many rights will get issued to shareholders based on the record date position, and then how many rights it will take to exercise for one new share. The next thing is your share price. We've seen offers with a fixed share price. So as soon as your prospectus is sent out the door, it's telling exercises $5 per share, let's say. The other scenario we've seen is an estimated price. So and that's usually based on that you're setting the price based on the at expiration, whatever you're trading at, usually a percentage of that final closing price. You would set an estimated price because shareholders, in order to exercise, they do need to surrender funds also. So if you set that estimated share price, you always want to go slightly higher than what you expect the final price to be. The reason for that is, for us, for Broadridge, for Computershare, it's much easier for us to send refunds at the end of the offer to holders because they paid slightly more than to send out invoices to those holders. You can imagine us trying to collect additional funds from the holders and how long that process could take for us. So talk about the pricing, talks about the rights issuance, and then Jason had talked about the documents mailing out. One thing that you have to consider is foreign shareholders. Foreign shareholders usually cannot participate in rights offerings because it's considered a solicitation, or it could be considered a solicitation in their country. So you'll have to assess if it's considered a solicitation, if we are mailing out documents to foreign holders, or more likely than not, what we do is we send them the prospectus, but we don't send them the rights card itself. So they don't have the vehicle to exercise their rights. If they're looking to participate, what they would have to do is most likely get counsel local to them to opine on if it's considered a solicitation in their area or not for a foreign holder to participate. So just keep that in mind. So I think we can go to the next slide, Michael.
So process flow. So this is sort of the overall kind of mechanics of the offer from start to finish as far as the distribution goes. So it all starts with the issuer, and the issuer will designate a rights agent or subscription agent to facilitate the transaction. It can be their transfer agent. It can be a third party. What the most critical part of this process, which we've already spoken about, is the communication in advance and getting the agent sort of engaged up front, so that way they can work through any of the mechanics that will follow downstream. That being said, everything really starts and stems from the announcement of the record date, right? So that's sort of the first domino to fall with the actual mailing process. Once that record date is established, what will happen from there will be two separate processes. There'll be a process for the registered holders and a process for the beneficial holders who own through banks and brokers. So for the registered holders, as Jason and Scott just demonstrated, we will issue the rights after the record date based off whatever ratio is determined. The rights are actually printed on the rights certificate. Jason showed an example on slide 3. And then that will get mailed to registered holders directly within 4 to 5 business days. At that point, it's up to the registered holders to, upon receipt of the materials, review, decide if they want to participate in the offer, and then at that point, return that rights certificate along with their subscription payment to the subscription agent. The subscription agent will receive that presentation. They will check it to make sure it's in good order. In the event that there's additional paperwork needed, or we're missing a signature, or they didn't provide appropriate funding, a communication will go back to that registered holder, advising them of what is needed. On the beneficial side, that process is a little different. So what will happen is first and foremost, the rights agent will begin to coordinate the setup of the event at DTC. And DTC has a platform called their ASOP system. And that is essentially where the rights agent will create the event on the DTC platform. DTC, once the event is set up and approved by the subscription agent and all terms and conditions of the offer are confirmed, they'll then push that out to the underlying banks and brokers, who in turn will then push that out to their customers. Now, in that scenario, there's a few things to consider. So for the banks and brokers, it's really up to them how the information gets sent to their underlying customers. A good portion of them, banks and brokers who utilize Broadridge for proxy mailings, they also utilize us for corporate action mailings. So in the event that the bank and broker is a Broadridge reorg client, they will rely on Broadridge to send the communications on their behalf to their customers. Then you have banks and brokers who may not use Broadridge, so they'll be responsible for sending communications to their customers directly. And even if Broadridge is part of the beneficial notification, you still may see banks and brokers send their own internal notifications as a backup. The thing to consider here is timing, right? So I mentioned the registered mailing can take 4 to 5 business days. The beneficial can take up to 7 business days. So as we mentioned in the beginning, when the issuer is engaging the subscription agent, going over the mailing timeline is very critical because these offers have a short shelf life. So you may have 10 business days, 15 business days, 20 business days. But if you start talking about 1 week or 1 to 2 weeks to get the mailings out the door, the post office to deliver the materials, and for the underlying holders to review and then return their subscription, you can see how a 2-week window can be a little tight. So depending on the circumstances of the offer, you may have a situation where the issuer has a backfill or they have someone who will be willing to purchase any unsubscribed shares. So in that scenario, they may not be as concerned with a short mailing timeline. In the event that the issuer has no backstop and they really need to kind of solicit the street to get that participation. And if you think about it, most shares or most rights will be held on the beneficial side. That's usually the larger population as opposed to the registered. So if you don't have a backstop and you really want to, get optimal participation, you may consider a longer expiration window based off the mailing timeline. So let's fast forward. The holders receive their packages. I'm a beneficial holder. I will receive instructions specific to my bank and broker on how I need to return my subscription. And then the bank and broker, upon receipt of that subscription, they will communicate that back to DTC via that ASOP system. And then the subscription agent will gather those results via that system as well. And then the subscription agent is ultimately responsible for the collection of all subscriptions, whether it's registered or beneficial, and then the reporting to the issuer of those results. And then obviously, as we get to expiration date, that reporting will be accelerated. And then, on the actual closing or the expiration time, a final report will be delivered to the issuer. And then depending on sort of the timeline from there, we will proceed to closing, as Scott mentioned, potentially proration if we're oversubscribed. And then ultimately, if we get to a closing, forwarding the cash to the issuer and then issuing the shares. So I'll pause there. Does anyone have any questions? I do see a highlight in the Q&A button.
We
Oh, I'm
do
looking
have
at it.
one question.
Yeah.
It says, if you will pardon this short digression into a rights plan, are the poison pill rights that are issued actually warrants? And are such rights or warrants usually issued upon plan trigger or upon plan establishment? And the rights or warrants trade in tandem with the underlying stock?
So it depends, and Scott, feel free to jump in. But if we're talking about rights plans, typically what happens is the issuer will engage their transfer agent and make them aware of an upcoming potential rights plan agreement that needs to be instituted, a poison pill. What'll happen is the issuer and the agent will work together to get the sort of plumbing of the rights plan in place. In the event that the issuer needs to sort of break the glass, so to speak, and actually implement the rights plan, at that point, the agent will do the necessary steps to make sure that the allocation of shares increasing to the actual rights plan holders takes effect to then prevent any dilution from a takeover via a poison pill.
Yeah, and we usually see it happen at the time. As Mike said, when the glass breaks, that's when the issuance happens. Very rarely do we see rights issued prior to that time. And again, don't confuse the two. This is a subscription offer, short-lived. This expires. A poison pill is something that goes on, usually involved in a hostile takeover, is when you see those poison pills or those types of rights involvement. So the issuance all depends on client when it takes place, but it usually takes place when the event happens. That's when they're diluting the market with the shares at that time, because it's the existing shareholders of the company at that time.
Yep. And I'll be honest, more often than not, the implementation or the preliminary implementation of a poison pill is strictly strategical. And I don't want to say never, but more often than not, they don't actually get implemented. They're just sort of there as protection for the issuer. Okay. Any other questions on the overall process flow and mechanics of the mailing?
I don't see any other ones right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
you got it. Scott, you're up.
Yeah, so this slide definitely overlaps a lot what Mike was talking about. He talked about the DTC setup. DTC, there's two sides of DTC when we're talking about the rights offering. The rights are actually issued by the dividend department at DTC, and they issue out the rights. And then the conversions area of DTC will actually run the rights program during the event. So we have first bullet point here is request a new QSIP. A new QSIP is only needed if you want the rights to trade. If you don't have a backstop that's going to take up all of your subscriptions, and you want this to be as popular as possible, you may want the rights to trade. They'll get into the right hands and they'll be exercised. There usually is a difference though between a traded right and a record date owner who received the rights because they're a record date owner. That record date owner is the only one that can actually oversubscribe on their shares. So they can exercise the rights issued to them fully, and then they have the oversubscription privilege. A traded right usually doesn't have that oversubscription privilege. And that's to keep the percentages of your current record date shareholders roughly the same, by allowing them to exercise, and they're the only ones that can actually oversub. The file for effectiveness with the SEC, that's something you'll consult with your counsel. Draft shareholder communications, same thing with counsel, but as Jason mentioned at the beginning, we want to be involved in that. A lot of times counsel will just take a document that was filed previously. It might not be the latest iteration, and they'll mark that up with new dates, your company name. But critical changes may not be made to that. That happened after it was drafted, or even was pointed out when it was originally drafted but never implemented. So definitely get us involved as quickly as possible. Consolidate your shareholder records. You may have shareholders that have a couple different accounts. You'd want to try to combine those accounts together so they're not exercising on various accounts. This is the time to consolidate them if you can. The subscription agreement is going to be between you and your agent. So we'll send out that agreement. We'll negotiate it with yourselves and counsel, and we'll finalize that. And you want to do that sooner rather than later. The issuance of the rights, of course, is all based on record date. The rights that you get issued to you are all based on your record date position and how many shares you own at that time. We had talked earlier about the ratio going out. Usually it's the 1-for-1 ratio going out. You'll have to decide how rounding will happen or the intervals of rights if you're going to round up to be divisible by the number of rights to exercise into the common shares. Mailing the documents we had already talked about. And now, so tracking rights exercised. This is the other key role that we play. So we'll set up that offer with DTC for all of the street positions that want to participate in your offer. And we'll also send out those rights cards to your registered shareholders and receive them directly. So during the course of your offer, and we usually see these for about 20 business days, but Michael had alluded to that we may want to go a little bit longer because of the delay in mailing. And quite frankly, DTC has been taking a while to set up the offer also on their end. So you may want to extend that 20 days. Again, if you have a backstop, you may not need to. But if you're looking for full participation and giving everybody enough time to participate, you may want to extend it a little bit. So on a daily basis, we'll track all of that for you. The amount of rights exercised, the amount of shares associated with those rights being exercised, any oversubscription shares, and if there are notice of guarantee is allowed, any notice of guarantee shares submitted under the notice of guarantee, and also the dollar amount tracking. Ourselves will track what brokers have participated in the offer so far. That's the level that we see. That might be a question that comes up. Do we actually see the beneficial holder information who's participating in the rights offering? We do not. We just see it at the overall broker level. And then, of course, your registered shareholders, if they participate, we will see them directly. We'll be able to report that to you on a nightly basis of what registered shareholders have have exercised their rights. And that leads us up to the final expiration date. Most likely it's a 5 p.m. expiration. We'll send out that final report to you. If there is a notice of guarantee, it will extend at least one more business day. A key thing with rights offerings is that holders have to send in the funds in order to exercise. They can't separate the two of them. So they send in their exercise of rights. They also have to send in the funds. There was mention of personal checks. We do accept personal checks. We do accept wires as two forms of payment. Certified checks and money orders are also accepted with a caveat. They do have to have the shareholders' information printed on that check. The reason for that is money laundering. You could use a money order to actually participate in the rights offering. And if your information, your personal information isn't typed by the bank or whoever creates that money order, it could be a form of it could be considered money laundering. So it's kind of critical with that. And that's usually why you see personal checks and wires as really the only two forms of payment. So we'll send out the nightly reports, roughly that 20 business day period. Now, one thing to consider also is that for business days, the market may be open, but banks may be closed. We just ran into this for a Columbus Day. So it was a market trading day, but because banks were closed, DTC does not really count it as a date for subscription offers because, again, cash is kind of tied to your exercise. So just keep that into account also, especially if you're trying to have your expiration date on one of those strange holidays. It might not work. So we sent out the final report to you. If there is a guarantee, there'll be one more report coming out to you, letting you know that those rights were actually delivered, that were guaranteed, or they failed delivery. They failed to guarantee on them. So we'll give you that final report, and hopefully you're oversubscribed at that point, meaning that there's more shareholders are looking for more shares than you're actually allocating to them. So when we run into that position, we run a proration. Everybody that exercised their rights that were issued to them on record date, they'll have those shares issued to them. We'll only prorate on the oversubscription shares. So anybody looking for that oversubscription will prorate that. And the proration is a little bit different than a tender offer. It's not a set rate that, oh, we'll only accept 20% of all the oversubscription shares. It's based shareholder by shareholder, and it's based on their record date position. So a shareholder who held 100,000 shares and was looking to oversubscribe for an additional 10,000 shares will receive more shares in the oversub than a holder that may hold 1,000 shares, and they're looking to oversub for that same 1,000 share number. So the percentage of oversubscription shares that you're allowed or that you'll most likely get in proration is going to be higher depending on your record date position. The higher the record date position, the more oversubscription shares that will be allocated to you. We'll provide that proration report to you to look through and just get final sign off from you before we complete any issuances. As far as new share issuances, Computershare anyways, will be asking for a signed board resolution approving the rights offering, and then an opinion of counsel letting us know that those new shares being issued are validly issued, fully paid, non-assessable shares. So with that, we'll set up a reserve, issue out the new shares to the street, to your registered shareholders, and of course your issue outstanding will go up by that amount. With that issuance, we'll also send you all the funds raised based on those shares and the price per share that was collected from the holders. So definitely a lot of information in that slide. I'll pause for any questions or comments. I guess we're good.
Yep, I don't see any questions.
Excellent.
Jason?
All right, so we have talked about, Sorry. We have talked about the mailing timings quite a bit, and I'll get to some of the nuances here on that. So you have a couple of things happening at the same time when it comes to mailing commencement date. You've got the first package being dropped in the mail, which is really just for affidavit purposes. You've got the registered and beneficial mailings that are being set up behind the scenes and go out, 5 to 7 days later. At the same time, on launch date, we sent out a blast to hundreds of banks and brokers to announce the terms of the deal, identify the agent, and provide the actual offer documents. The reason we do this is the DTC has, we'll call it their PSOP platform, which is the participant platform that the banks and brokers are on. They'll have all of the details of the event out there, but they don't really have a good way of communicating all of the actual PDFs of the enclosures. Our email blast to the back offices hopefully gets ahead of that. Like Scott said, the DTC can take 5 days themselves to get everything set up for us to approve on the system. It's after that point in time that the brokers and the banks can see what's actually happening at DTC. So there's sort of a gray zone between launch and when action can be taken. Now, the one thing I want to point out here is in many instances, our issuers are stressed about the turnaround time of the beneficial mailing because there's a mindset out there that those people need their documents. Well, in many instances, a physical mailing occurs, but there's also secondary communications done by their bank or broker, either an email or if you're a Robinhood customer, you may get a little pop-up alert on your app. So unlike a proxy mailing where the actual voting cards go out in the mail and have to come back via mail or internet, the rights offering is not as dependent on the mail date. So don't stress too much if you're going through one of these and you see the mailings taking longer than planned. It's not slowing anybody down on the street from participating. Getting those documents out there into the broker's back offices and letting them see the terms so they can start working through their underwriting process is the key. So we make sure we get ahead of that quickly. Now, there's stress on both sides of this because you've got the initial mailing going out, and we're always happy to report when that's done. We have instances, and there's a misnomer out there that Broadridge sees everything because we handle the bulk of the banks and brokers. Not the case. On every event or near it, I'll get a question from one of my contacts, hey, one of our board members never got his Merrill materials. Where are they? I have no idea. I can't see any beneficial shareholder data. We've got a team downstairs that works with the banks and brokers directly. Merrill can reach out to their rep. They can walk through anything as far as what they need on where is the document, how is it sent, email, physical, replacements and whatnot. I cannot see any of that. So I always try to make that clear early on. The question always arises. The other stressful part is the way that the bank broker worlds work when the subscriptions come in. So we're seeing, I would say anything under 85% street ownership, meaning 85% or more of the shares are held by the banks and brokers, is fairly normal. That means you have a very small registered population from an overall share perspective or rights perspective that can participate. Add on to that the registered shareholders are usually less responsive just because of their investment method than they would be if they had a broker. You usually see a pretty low subscription rate on the registered holder population themselves. Here comes the problem. If we're trying to raise $100 million and we're 4 days out from expiration and we're at a 13% take raise, that's when panic sets in. We start getting the phone calls, what's going on, what's happening? Well, what's happening is the banks and brokers are accumulating all of these subscriptions, and they typically send them in mass to the agent, us, Computershare, 2 days or even the day before expiration. Reason being, they don't want to have to work through DTC to back out a subscription on behalf of one of their customers. If I change my mind, I go to my Goldman guy, and I say, you know what, back it out. It's extra work for them. Or it's impossible if it's an irrevocable transaction. Some deals say once you subscribe, you're in, you're not getting out. So the brokers will hold that cash and the subscriptions in their back pocket until right before expiration. So I have the lovely job of saying, we're going to be great because this all makes sense. You're offering shares at a premium still. We're trending below the trading price. There's no reason why these shares or subscriptions won't come in, and they always do. I haven't had a deal that failed yet. That is the biggest conversation I have, probably 6-7 times throughout the deal. We're going to hit this dead zone where we're live and nothing's happening. Well, it's totally normal. It's the worst part of my job. It's gonna be fine. So that's the last to
Yeah,
say about
what I would add, Jason, I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the challenges is the kind of collection of beneficial subscriptions, and it could also be related to volume, right? You may have a scenario where there's just too much to submit on a daily basis, so they kind of bulk them. Or maybe they are handling other priorities that day and they're waiting to get closer to expiration to focus on that particular event. But Jason made a good point that I want to just emphasize. We have no insight into the underlying beneficial holders. Even after the brokers submit the subscriptions through DTC, we only see them at the broker level, right? So we may have a scenario where an issuer says, hey, our board member who owns through Merrill, he swears he sent his subscription. Can you confirm that you guys got it? We're limited in what we can confirm, right? If the holder happened to have, let's say, 1 million rights and they exercise the full million, well, maybe we can kind of correlate that to a broker subscription by looking at the quantity of rights exercised and maybe, the broker, and then tying that to that underlying holder. But, one of the concerns that happens is if there are beneficial holders who are looking for confirmation, we can only speak at the broker level. Sorry, Jason, just wanted to add that in.
Pardon me. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right. So now we move on to transferable versus non-transferable rights. So non-transferable is the majority of what we see out there. Meaning, if I own 100 shares of ABC Corp, it's a 1-for-1 right to share basis. I receive 100 rights. I can do with them what I want. I can submit my exercise, or subscription, I should say, and at whatever rate, I can oversubscribe. I'll get whatever I get in the end if it's prorated, and I'm happy. I also have the option of taking no action. If I don't, there's no financial impact to me. That non-transferable right didn't carry an intrinsic value with it. There's no gain or loss realized by me. I don't have the option to transfer that right to purchase shares to somebody else. I'm the sole owner. It's all me or nothing. Conversely, and more rarely, we have issuers who allocate transferable rights, where it's either all non-transferable or all transferable, based on what I've seen. So the rights get distributed. The quirk here is that they're also out there on a board, NASDAQ, NYSE. There's a initial price and there's a market. So if you take a 20-day subscription offer window, it'll take a few days for the rights to be allocated by DTC, and then on the board, you figure you're at launch date +5. You've got 15 days between when the rights start trading, because that's when they become accessible, to expiration. Well, we have to back that up a little bit. In order for me to sell my right through my broker to an unknown buyer, there is time needed for that set of rights to transfer. Trade +1 in today's world. So if I sell today, the rights settle out tomorrow. The day after that, which is, of course, Monday in this case, that's when I should see my rights in my account and I can subscribe to whatever security they're allocated to. That trade settlement and that exercise window means that the transferable rights normally have an earlier cutoff than the rest of the other deals out there, non-transferable, because you need to allocate time for that sale of the transferable to take place, the receipt or settlement of those rights, and then the subscription to be submitted. So normally in a deal like that, you'll see 3 or 4 days ahead of expiration, a transferable right deal sort of start to shut down. Otherwise, the longer you test the limits, the better chance you have of not being able to subscribe. One thing we didn't mention is that while there's an expiration date, which could be 5 p.m. tomorrow, a lot of brokers out there will put an earlier date. They need time for their back office to do all their allocations, their underwriting, and their transmission to DTC. So in a lot of cases, it's actually 2 days before the posted expiration that your bank or broker will cut things off. That's why it's important to pay attention to not only the offer materials from the issuer, but also the guidance from your bank or broker, because they're going to set the terms on how your subscription will be accepted or not. Registered holders have the benefit of they can have those materials or those documents and payment delivered to us as agent, a minute before expiration, and they're in. They're fine. It's rare that happens, but they have more flexibility on their end.
No, Jason, it might be a good time to, talking transferable, non-transferable. Notice of guarantee. This is the whole reason why that notice of guarantee is out there. So with a trade, a T+1 trade, let's say your expiration is tomorrow. If I buy the rights in the market tomorrow, they're not going to be in my account soon enough for me to exercise prior to expiration date. So that's why the guarantee could be in place. What that guarantee means is that my shares will settle. The rights that I bought in the market will settle on Monday. So again, if tomorrow is your expiration date, my rights will settle on Monday. I'll have my broker submit a guarantee tomorrow at expiration time. So once my rights clear on Monday, I'll still be able to surrender them into the offer and participate in the offer. So that's the whole reason for that guarantee is otherwise those rights would be worthless. If I bought them on Friday, I wouldn't have time to exercise them when they were in my account on Monday because the offer was over. So it does allow trading of your rights right up until expiration date. With that being said, though, as agent, we do sell rights for shareholders, registered shareholders, and the street also. We cut it off early. We usually cut it off 5 business days prior to the expiration date, and we're just talking about the sale of rights, not the exercise of the rights. The reason we do that is usually the market trading of the rights does slow down the sooner you approach expiration date. So 5 days out, we're still able to sell rights pretty regularly. 4 days out, 3 days out, it becomes less and less that we'll sell all the rights we go to market with. So that's why we cut it off early. So I just wanted to mention those 2 things.
That's perfect. Appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Any questions on those topics?
Nope, I don't see anything right now.
All right. Back to you, Scott.
Perfect. So talking about funding, and there's shareholder funding. So in order to exercise your rights, not only are you surrendering your rights, you're also sending in payment for those rights. We talked about personal check, cashier's checks, bank checks, and wires. And again, if a shareholder is using anything other than a wire or a personal check, they do need their personal information printed on that cashier's check or that money order. That's critical. And the big thing too is at the end of the offer, if we're still getting in those personal checks, if they don't clear, that just means we can't send those funds to you, client, fund, issuer, whichever that may be. We can't send those funds to you until they actually clear us. And hopefully they do clear, because it's a whole nother nightmare if they don't clear and they were part of proration and we can't issue shares to them. So I won't even get down that road. But yes, we need all the funds cleared before, of course, we can send those funds to you. So then it's the issuance of the entitlements. We talked a little bit about the requirements that we'll need in order to issue out those shares to all the shareholders after running proration. We'll have the allotment of what they're entitled to, and we'll need that board resolution, the opinion of council in order to set up the reserve of those newly issued shares. Of course, you could take them from Treasury if you happen to have a Treasury account, and that's what you're using those shares for. Obviously, we wouldn't need the opinion then because those were already issued shares. What else in regards to that? We'll be asking for your wire instructions to send you the funds at the end of the offer. And hopefully, again, it was oversubscribed, so you're realizing all the share issuance that you were contemplating and all the funding that you were looking at taking in. I don't know if anybody had questions in regards to oversubscriptions again, because that's the proration aspect does confuse a lot of our clients and issuers. So happy to delve a little bit more into that.
I don't see anything yet.
Okay, and I think that was it as far as the funding and issuance. And then just in regards to overview, again, You want to notify the exchange. So whether you trade on NASDAQ, NYSE, and you may need a new CUSIP number, obviously, but notifying the exchange, because they have to announce it. They need to know when you're going record date, when you're expiring. Definitely get them involved as soon as possible. The rights CUSIP number, you'll only need this if you're going to have your rights sellable on the market. If they're not sellable, there's no need for that new CUSIP number at all. Into the agreement with the rights agent and the information agent, critical. It's not a daunting agreement, but it does take some time to get through that and agreement on both sides. And you're going to want to start that as soon as possible also. Set your record date. Everything's based on record date, similar to a dividend or a proxy. Whoever the shareholders are on that record date, that's the ones who are going to get rights. Be very careful setting your record date around a proxy or around a dividend, especially if you have dividend reinvestments, because that could affect share positions around record date. So keep that in mind. You really don't want to have multiple events up against that record date. Determine the amount of shares to issue and the price per share. Yeah, that's usually all based on issue outstanding and how many additional rights you're issuing into the system, and whether you have a fixed price or an estimated price at the time of launch. Determine the rights issuance ratio and the rights exercise ratio. Again, the issuance based on record date is either going to be a 1-for-1 rights issuance, or it's going to be, you'll get one right for X amount of shares. So that has to be determined. And then that upfront determination depends on the rights exercise ratio. So if you exercise at a 1-for-1, if you issue at a 1-for-1 ratio, your exercise ratio is going to be X amount of rights for one new share. If you issue a percentage of rights per record date share, then the rights exercise ratio is usually a 1-for-1. Of course, we're happy to talk more about that because that can be confusing also. Determine the length of the offer. I know 20 days is usually the minimum. I've seen them even shorter, so I don't think it's a requirement that it has to be 20 days. That's usually what we see. But just because of the mail system now and DTC taking quite a while to set up the offer, we do always recommend a little bit longer. Finalize your mailing documents. That's the prospectus supplement that we talked about, the prospectus supplement, the rights card. And then if you do have a notice of guarantee, the notice of guarantee, and then the instructions to go along with that or shareholder documentation, a memo going out to the shareholders, some sort of shareholder letter. And then preparing those final documents, of course, for share issuance. That's the board resolutions, opinion of council for that new share issuance. And then the best part is booking the revenue at the end. So hopefully it was a very successful offer. You had shareholders looking for more shares than you were willing to offer. That's the best scenario. When we have to run a proration, then you're getting all the revenue that you were expecting. And you're seeing that your shareholders are excited to buy more of your shares out there. So that's always a good thing. I think that was our last slide, right, Mike?
Got
That
it.
is.
That was it. That was the finish line, Scott.
And that was the finish line. All right. Thank you so much, Scott, Jason, and Mike, for being here with us today and providing all of this really awesome education to everybody. And thank you to everybody who's joined and watched and participated. We're glad that you could be here with us. If you want any more, if you end up having more questions or need more information on anything, just please reach out to me, send me an email, and I'll get you in touch with the presenters. And we also hope to see you at our November webinar. It's going to be on avoiding escheatment. And then we also have our December regional event coming up, and that is going to be held both in person and virtually at the Verizon headquarters in New Jersey. So if you're able to make that, be sure to go over to the SSA website and register. The registration page is up. So if, like I said, if you have any other questions or need to get in touch with the presenters, just please let me know. And I hope everybody has a really great rest of your day.
Thank you, Chris.
That's all.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.